There are bridges, bridges in the sky, they are shining in the sun. They are stone and steel and wood and wire, they can change two things to one. They are languages and letters, they are poetry and all. They are love and understanding, and they're better than they all. They are languages and letters, they are poetry and all. They are love and understanding, and they're better than they all. There are canyons, they are yawning in the night. They are rank and bitter anger, they are all the void we find. They are fear and blind suspicion, they are apathy and pride. They are dark and soul foreboding, and they're so very wide. They are fear and blind suspicion, they are apathy and pride. They are dark and soul foreboding, and they're so very wide. Let us build a bridge of music, let us cross the sun. Let us span another canyon, let us write another vow. Oh, and if someone should ask us where we went bound today, we will tell them building bridges and we often done. Oh, if someone should ask us where we're up and bound today, we will tell them building bridges and we often done. We will tell them building bridges and we often done.
We will tell them building bridges and be off and on our way. Thank you, Bill Staines, for letting us use Bridges programming. Bridges song on Bridges programming. Welcome to Sunday on the Front Stoop. My name is Jeff Beller, and I'm with Susan Comod and Dennis Carriers. Susan's over here with a bad cold. She's doing her notes, and she's gonna try not to cough too much during the program. And Dennis is in New York. We're in Florida. And this is Sunday on the Front Stoop, the longest stoop in the world, brought to you by Bridges Programming. We sponsor the Human Renewable Energy Measure. That stands for just what it says, a measurement that says all humanity has to work about 1 hour a day for their basic needs, not their wants, their needs met. And everything's interconnected because of the economy. So we need to get this measurement into the economy, into the vocabulary, so we may be able to make an economy that works for all humanity, just like Bernie Sanders is saying, our politicians are saying. I don't think building walls is going to help us. We have to help all humanity on the same planet that we're on now.
It's just working for 1% of the population. And we don't mind that it's working for 1%. At least it's working for somebody. But it needs to work for the rest of us too.
Right. It needs to work for all humanity. And we have to stop killing people around the world, like in Syria. I think our president was talking about how complicated the issue is. Well, it's not complicated. If you just have a basic need met,
I didn't have the computer started.
if you have a basic need met, then if everybody has their basic needs met, their energy for food, energy units for food, which is about 1 million units, we'll call them calories. The same thing holds for water, energy from the sun, and shelter within what they need for basic needs. You can measure these in energy units. And if we say you live 80 years of age, then therefore 1 hour a day of your life work should give you your needs met, and that way you don't die. And you can get rid of minimum wage, which is arbitrary. You can get rid of welfare, which is arbitrary. You make sure basic needs are met anywhere in the world for 1 hour, and that's how we judge the gross domestic product. Now, we happen to have an election coming up, and we have one of the front runners in the Democratic Party is Hillary Clinton. For you guys who don't pay attention to the mainstream media, we were going to try to do a little stuff on that. and who is Hillary Clinton and what is she doing and why. And then we have Bernie Sanders, who seems to be a little closer to the idea of the HRM, but he doesn't have it yet. We also have the Pope, who is a little closer to the HRM, again, doesn't have the measurement yet. And we're going eventually, if this planet is to keep human life on it, we have to get this measurement in, or a measurement similar to this, into the vocabulary and go with the measurement, just like we go with the measurement of gravity or time or anything else that human beings require. Gesundheit. Gesundheit again. So anyway, that's where we are now. And I'm going to ask Dennis, like we just didn't want to start the program earlier, but we're going to be talking about who, in fact, is Hillary Clinton. Where did she come from?
Dennis, where did Hillary Clinton come from?
Go ahead.
Good. As a matter of fact, I can read what is on our introduction today. Who is Hillary Clinton? What do we think we know about her? Is ambition her main driver, or is she working for all of us, as she has often stated? It is impossible to see into the heart and motives of another person, making this kind of pursuit a very imperfect science when we try it with people we know and love. Trying to understand a career politician is even less accurate. So what do? Well, we are going to do some research and have some conversation about Hillary Clinton on our program. But we make no promises. Yes. Go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
It just says, but we make no promises. We hope that this conversation may be useful. So that's interesting because, as you mentioned, Jeff, I'm in the state of New York. In New York State, Hillary Clinton won the primary election, which was just last week. But it's very interesting because it's because of downstate. You know, New York State, the largest population in New York State is all around New York City. It's almost half of the population of the state itself around New York City. That's where Hillary won. But if you go upstate, wow, it's unbelievable. All the way from the capital of New York State, Albany, right up north to the Canadian border, it was Bernie Sanders who won all of those different counties.
Well, the thing is, I'm finding it interesting too. By in the Republican Party, you have this multimillionaire who literally spent a fortune of his own money to become president. For some reason, he decided he can do good for the country, I guess. But he reminds me a little bit of a dictator. But that's my personal feeling. I don't mean to bring that forward to anyone else. You might be a Trump supporter, and you have that right. I met Trump several times. I met Hillary Clinton several times. And I met Bernie Sanders just once. And I listened to speeches on both sides. And I've listened to Ted Cruz many times. So I'm a little bit, I'm interested in politics. I don't believe any one of them will do any good. I think Bernie Sanders may rock the apple, shake the tree make the apples fall a little bit. But even him, without a measurement, without that human renewable energy measure, we can't get there from here. We have to know where we are, and that's what the measurement does. And I don't think anyone can help. But because Hillary Clinton looks like she may win the election, I don't know. I mean, maybe Trump would win or Cruz. You don't know what's going to happen in the election. And the reason why it's important is because the U.S. is the puppet of Great Britain, who controls the economic system. And Great Britain, if you've heard of Greenwich Mean Time, you heard of the United Kingdom, and you go back thousands and thousands of years, you'll realize that Great Britain, or the United Kingdom, they united to control the economic system on a worldwide basis, and they're doing it today. And that's what's controlling our economic system. And Great Britain also has Big Ben, and Greenwich Mean Time, and that makes all the people in the world work on Greenwich Mean Time so they can get the people, when they unloaded the big boats, they had people, the dock hands there to make sure commerce continued on. And before Great Britain, before the United Kingdom, before the pharaohs and kings, we had a really good system working for our human beings. They worked together, and they didn't work in competition. They worked in cooperation, and only till we got abundance. Because when you didn't have abundance, you really had to work together like you did in any emergency. If there was an accident in front of your house and there was no heavy equipment like's happening in Ecuador right now, there's no heavy equipment, so everything has to be done by hands to save other people. So other people get out there in mass and they move mountains of stuff until they can get machinery in, and then people get hurt and they sweat and they take, it's a tremendous amount of work, but people work together in a portion where they have to, and now that we had an excess, that's when the economy started, and that was 5,000 years ago. So it's very important to understand that human beings need to cooperate, not in competitive things, and that's why we have things like hydrofracking and people we call greed, but it's not greed, it's the way the system itself works. Now, I want to go back to Dennis and the conversation earlier. So where does Hillary Clinton come from? Dennis?
Where does Hillary Clinton come from? I would say from her mother and even her father, 9 months earlier.
Well, I think that may be the case, but where does she really come from? Does she come from affluency, lots of money? Her education, she obviously went to some of the best colleges in the United States.
I can read
Susan,
to that question, and then you guys can bat it around a bit. And I'm reading from Early Life and Education in the Wikipedia summary of Hillary Clinton, which anybody can bring up. Early life: Hillary Diane Rodham, born October 26, 1947, at Edgewater Hospital in Chicago, Illinois. So this is another candidate coming from Illinois. Isn't interesting?
Just like Lincoln.
Also like Obama.
Obama, yeah.
I don't know if he wasn't born there, but he definitely worked there as a professor at the university for many years, 20 or something. Okay, back to Hillary Clinton. And she was Hillary Diane Rodham at this point. Raised in a United Methodist family, first in Chicago, then from the age of 3 in suburban Park Ridge, Illinois. Her father, Hugh Ellsworth Rodham, and he no longer is living, was of Welsh and English descent, managed a successful small business in the textile industry. Her mother, Dorothy Emma Howe, also deceased, was a homemaker of English, Scottish, French, Canadian, and Welsh descent. Hillary has 2 younger brothers, Hugh and Tony. As a child, Hillary Rodham was a teacher's favorite at her public schools in Park Ridge. She participated in sports such as swimming and baseball and earned numerous awards as a Brownie and a Girl Scout. She attended Maine East High School, where she participated in student council, school newspaper, selected for the National Honor Society. For her senior year, she was redistricted to Maine South High School, where she was a National Merit finalist and graduated in the top 5% of her class in 1965. Her mother wanted her to have an independent professional career, and her father, otherwise a traditionalist, felt that his daughter's abilities and opportunities should not be limited by gender. Raised in a politically conservative household, she helped canvass Chicago's South Side at age 13 following the very close 1960 U.S. presidential election, where she found evidence of electoral fraud against Republican candidate Richard Nixon. So she started out as a Republican.
Well, I want to interject something because
not that there's any difference between the parties anymore.
Well, I just want to interject something.
Certainly.
What Dennis What do you think of Richard Nixon? You think he was a really good president?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I have other presidents that I put at the top of the list.
Well,
what do you think about Richard?
What did Richard Nixon say that the most truthful thing that any president said before they tried to impeach him? Do you remember that? He was the only president that ever said this.
What did he say?
He said, before they tried to impeach him, we do not need a minimum wage in this country. Now, what do you think of that?
Well, that's interesting.
You think that's bad or good?
Well, I think it's bad. I mean, right now.
Now this is what happened. He said that, but in the very next sentence, you know what he said?
What?
We need a living wage in this country.
Oh, okay. Well, then that's different.
But you see what happened when he said that. The media cut him, only recorded that portion, and they didn't record the second portion,
which was the living wage.
Which was the living wage. And all the liberals in the world said, that's terrible for him to say we don't need a minimum wage. But he said something much more profound. We need a living wage, not a minimum wage. And that's when they decided to impeach him, because he was saying we don't need to figure out what a minimum wage is because we don't know what that is, but we definitely know we need a living wage. And that's what was amazing to me. I didn't know that until about a year ago.
Which sends chills up the spines of people who want to have the status quo of the economics remain as it is, remain as it is.
Right, and a living wage is different than a minimum wage. A living wage is based on
actually a wage that you can live on, no matter
based
how
on all your
the money values fluctuate,
right.
The prices fluctuate,
so
etc.
But anyways,
so if he was actually thinking about that at that time, that would be, incredibly
profound.
Right.
Okay, let's get back to Hillary Clinton. But I wanted to say, so here she was, a Republican, realizing that there was election fraud against the Nixon administration. And the reason why there was election fraud against him is because he was thinking about a way of changing the economic system.
Well, he was a very complex person. But we can't discuss Nixon
right now. Let's go back to Hillary.
So anyways, that was 1960. So then on to 1964, she volunteered to campaign for Republican candidate Barry Goldwater. Rodham's early political development was shaped most by her high school history teacher, a fervent anti-communist who introduced her to Goldwater's, quote, the book, The Conscience of a Conservative, and by her Methodist youth minister, who, and her mother, was also concerned with issues of social justice. And she actually met Martin Luther King in 1962 briefly. So maybe that formed her. This was still when she was a young person, probably about 18, 19. Then she enters college, and she went to Wellesley College.
A very high.
Well, that's one of the
prestigious
Six
colleges,
Sisters or whatever. It's a very good
prestigious
New England college.
Right.
In 1965, she enrolled at Wellesley College, where she majored in political science. And it makes sense with all of her awards and all of her distinguishing academic accomplishments as a high school student, that she would be chosen by a college like that. She majored in political science. And during her freshman year, she served as president of the Young Republicans at the Wellesley College. With this Rockefeller Republican-oriented group, she supported the elections to mayor of John Lindsay in New York City and to U.S. Senator of Edward Brooke from Massachusetts. She stepped down from this position as her views changed regarding the American Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War. So she was searching. She started out thinking that she would want to be aligned with the Rockefeller Republicans, but then she found it seems that the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War started thinking in other directions. In a letter to her youth minister at this time, she described herself as, quote, a mind conservative and a heart liberal. And that is a very hard thing to reconcile when you.
Well, it's similar to Bernie Sanders,
right.
who again, this is interesting. On the Democratic ticket, the two front runners are not actually Democrats. One was a Republican who switched to Democrat, and one is a independent social democrat, which is very interesting to see the movement on the Democratic Party. And then now you see on the Republican Party, you're seeing someone who's totally right wing as far as religious beliefs go, which is Cruz, and very conservative, doesn't want to. And then you have who was a Democrat who switched to Republican, which was Trump, who was a very, very wealthy guy, and he wants to get rid of all he wants to close the borders.
Well, he wants to find scapegoats.
Right, he's
looking
for scapegoats, just like Hitler did.
Yes, exactly.
But this is an interesting situation. So I just want to bring that out.
Yeah, I'll just go on a bit because this is kind of basic stuff that you can find on the Wikipedia summary. And it's, they try to be as unbiased as they can. So I'm not going to her website where they're going to say they're going to promote her in a different way, which you can do yourself, of course. And in this next sentence, I would take issue to what's being stated here. They say, in contrast to the 60s current that advocated radical actions against the political system, she sought to work for change within it. Well, I lived through that period, and there were plenty of people trying to change the political system within it, and would have been considered part of the what people considered the hippie movement at that time.
Yeah,
so they're trying in this to make a little whack at the 60s and saying they were radical. They were not radical. They were thinkers, and they were reading a lot of interesting stuff. They were thinking about things that nobody had considered thinking about before, and it was influencing their actions. Many, many people felt that I grew up with that you could change the political system from within. That took a long time to die, that feeling. And obviously, Hillary Rodham at this time felt that it was possible. And she dedicated, like Bernie Sanders, her life to politics because she felt, and at that time it looked like an avenue that was a very reasonable choice. And they both have dedicated their lives to politics and serving in politics in order to, and in her case, it seems, she's, as she said, she's conservative, but in her heart, she's got a liberal social justice. Not that the conservatives don't consider social justice. There's an awful lot that's similar between the two parties now. It's just like the similarities between religions, and you can find differences, but there are basic similarities that are obvious. Okay, in her junior year, Hillary Rodham became a supporter of the anti-war presidential nomination campaign of Democrat Eugene McCarthy. Okay, I remember that very well. That was probably the first election I voted in. He was a very appealing candidate at the time. A lot of you remember the
McCarthy era.
That was he was like maybe like Bernie Sanders is representing now, sort of a flashpoint for the ideas about we can't solve world problems through war. He was against the war. He had a different view than the other candidates. And Bernie Sanders is trying to say to us, look, we've got an economic system that is not serving the majority of people. And so he's acting as like a flashpoint for that right now.
And Trump is acting as a flashpoint that we have to change the way we do business.
Or
And we-
overseas, right?
Overseas,
Not ship all our jobs away.
You got to be independent. We got to we have a friend of ours who writes a lot of stuff about this, and he is a isolationist, and he believes that he wants to be isolated from everybody, but you really can't. And he will be affected because, and we all are affected because you can't be. You can. Every human being should be an individual, but you have to be an individual within the society that you live in. So you need to be an individualist. At the same time, you have to be collectivist or a non-isolated person because you're affected by it. You're affected by if someone poisons your water and your air and your soil or your noise pollution or your light pollution. You're affected by all these. So you can't be an individual. You've got to work to make sure it's better for the society around you. And that's there's one other thing I wanted to bring out. I heard someone on the news this morning, and the basic was saying, well, this is an imperfect world. So we have to learn to live within the imperfect world. Like you shouldn't even try to change it. And that's basically what Hillary Clinton was saying. She said, well, you got to do what's doable. You can't be a dreamer. Well, I disagree with that.
She's got a very practical.
You got to do what's practical.
Kind of stance because she was a Girl Scout and that sets your trends, and she won a lot of for doing things what would be considered the acceptable way.
Well, they said,
and she's gotten a lot of awards throughout her years for doing things in an acceptable way.
The same people who give the awards, the same people who give the awards are the same people who set up boundaries.
True, but the awards are what she's been going for. But in another part of her personality, she is, thinking about the injustices, and that is a very good sign. We just spoke about in her 1968, she was elected president of the Wellesley College Government Association and served through 1969. So she was always looking for these distinguishing awards and accolades and positions and whatever.
I want to interrupt you. I want to interrupt you while you're saying that. Dennis, since this woman, Hillary Clinton, was always looking for these prestigious awards.
Well, let's call her Hillary Rodham at this point.
Hillary Rodham.
Right.
Do you think that she was ambitious woman or greedy woman?
I would say ambitious.
Well, she keeps on getting these awards to get more money because the more awards she gets, the more awards she gets,
to distinguish herself in terms of other people.
So isn't that a form of greed?
Well, you could call it that.
How much power does somebody need in order to be effective?
Right.
How much distinctive accolades does one have to have in order to be effective?
But I'm going to just agree with you, Dennis. I do believe it's ambition and not greed. Okay, I just want to get that squared away.
Well, there's a lot of ambition here. She goes for the challenge of, and she likes to compete against other people for distinguishing positions in college and high school and in the Brownies and Girl Scouts, clearly. In her student government role, she played a role in keeping Wellesley from being embroiled in the student disruptions common in other colleges. Okay, so she didn't want anything to erupt into something that couldn't be managed. She didn't want any kind of possibilities that there be demonstrations that might get out of hand or whatever. So she was calming down the student body in her own way, I guess. Who knows what, there's speeches that I'm sure she made, and we don't have them here, but they would reveal maybe a little more about who she was at that time. They don't have any quotes. They don't have very many quotes from her. So far, I've only got one quote here. And that was the one where she described herself as a conservative in her mind and a liberal in her heart. Supposedly that's a real quote. I think it was written to her minister. Okay, a number of her fellow students thought at this time that she might someday become the first female president of the United States. So right away at that time, this idea, and I'm sure they talked to her about it, was planted in her mind. So she's had this idea for a long time, since she's in her early 20s. So anyway, she was assigned as an intern at the House Republican Conference by one of her professors, and so she was invited by moderate New York Republican Representative Charles Goodell to help Governor Nelson Rockefeller's late entry campaign for the Republican nomination, and that would have been, they don't have a date, well, I guess it was 1968. She went to the Republican National Convention. So she's still aligning herself with the Republicans at this point. She was upset by the way Richard Nixon's campaign portrayed Rockefeller and by what she perceived as the convention's veiled racist messages, and left the Republican Party for good. Okay, so that 1968 was a big change for her. She wrote a senior thesis, a critique of the tactics of radical community organizer Saul Alinsky. And so you'd have to look up who he was, what his radical organizing, as they call it, was about, if it indeed was radical. But anyways, she wrote about him in her senior's thesis, and I haven't researched that. Years later, while she was First Lady, access to her thesis was restricted at the request of the White House, and it became the subject of some speculation. Okay, well, I'm speculating too. Anyway, in 1969, she graduated with a Bachelor of Arts, honors in political science.
The White House restricted
that
access?
Thesis, the access to her thesis, her senior thesis about Saul Alinsky, who they describe as a radical community organizer, and she critiqued his tactics in that thesis.
When the White House restricted it.
When she was
That's
First
very
Lady.
interesting.
Right. So that was one of the times when her writing, or the first time maybe, her was restricted access to her thoughts. Interesting. In 1969, graduated, etc. Following pressure from some students, she became the first student in Wellesley College history to deliver its commencement address. That's it, very much an honor right there. Her speech received a standing ovation lasting 7 minutes. She was featured in an article published in Life magazine due to the response to a part of her speech that criticized Senator Brooke, who had spoken before her at the commencement. Well, that must have been an ad lib then, because she couldn't have known what he was going to say. She's quick on her feet. She also appeared nationally on talk shows, etc. And this is interesting because our President Obama did something similar when he became the first president of the Harvard Law publication. He became the first editor, black editor. He had all kinds of coverage for that, and that lifted him into the public eye in a big way at that point in his life. The same point, at graduation, or that period of a person's development, that Hillary has been lifted with her commencement speech that she made, the first student in Wellesley College history to deliver its commencement address. Okay, then she's on to Yale Law School. She served as the editor, no surprise there, of the Yale Review of Law and Social Action. So here's another similarity with Obama. He was the editor of the Harvard Review of Law. Anyways, interesting similarities. During her second year, she worked at the Yale Child Study Center. Okay, there's the beginning of what we know became her lifelong focus on child rights and women's rights, which would be, of course, linked. Learning about new research on early childhood brain development and working as a research assistant on the seminal work, quote, Beyond the Best Interests of the Child, 1973. Okay, she took on cases of child abuse at the Yale New Haven Hospital, volunteered to provide free legal advice to the poor, awarded a grant to work at Marion Wright Edelman's Washington Research Project, assigned to Senator Walter Mondale's subcommittee on migratory labor. So this also corresponds with Obama's work in social justice in Illinois. It's amazing. I don't know why I'm picking up on this, but I am. All right, on and on. She's quite accomplished, brilliant mind, has a social justice type leaning that's developing more and more as she gets older. In 1971, she began dating Bill Clinton, also a law student at Yale. She interned at the law firm in California.
She went to some good colleges.
Yes, because she distinguished herself
Right.
academically and everything all throughout, very consistent. So the firm she interned with, known for its support of constitutional rights, civil liberties, and radical causes. Okay, I won't go too deeply into that. The following summer, Rodham and Clinton campaigned in Texas for unsuccessful Democratic presidential candidate George McGovern, received a Juris Doctor degree from Yale in 1973. She postponed marriage to him until she graduated, but because she was uncertain at that time if she wanted to tie her future to his. That's interesting. Okay.
I want to interject something.
So we're getting close to what we've lived through here.
I want to, by the way,
in terms of him becoming president and her becoming first lady.
Okay, but before we do that, I want to get to something. There's several things that there's a problem within our whole society. And I believe we can change that. And we're going to give you the way that you can change it, an answer to the problem we think that you could do something about. And I'll give it to you right after Susan's done. But I want to show you a very funny similarity about which is interesting. The two front runners, which is Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, it looks like. Donald Trump was a Democrat who changed to the Republican Party. And Hillary Clinton was a Republican who changed to the Democratic Party.
Interesting.
Now, what do you think about that, Dennis?
Well, to me, Hillary would be if you had a dysfunctional government, maybe you could reform it after 43 presidents have all been male, to have our first female president, who's been in the White House already for 8 years, because if you think about it, there are more females in this country than there are males.
Yeah, but how would she do anything different? How would she do anything different than all she was concerned about when she worked for when she was the vice president? When she was in the White House as the wife of the first lady. She was concerned about the wife of the president or the first lady. She was concerned about healthcare, which was a good thing. But when she left that and she became senator of New York State, can you name anything that she did that was beneficial to New York?
Well, I think she represented New York very well.
How?
Aren't you surprised? She just won the primary in New York State.
But how did she, tell me one or two things that she did that was memorable? Did she fight to get rid of fracking? Did she go online about minimum wage? Did she talk about poverty in New York State? Did she talk about, what did she do?
I really cannot answer that.
Because she did not, as far as I could see. Now, I'm not saying Hillary wouldn't be better than Trump or Trump wouldn't be better than Hillary. I might have my own personal feeling about that. And I think Bernie Sanders would be better than anybody, but that's my personal feeling. But I don't know what Hillary ever did that people like her. I mean, it's just it's like a popularity contest. So I can't tell you what she did, and you can't tell me either. Just all you can tell me is that it'd be good to have a female in the White House because more than half the population are female. That's outrageous.
Here's what they say about her.
Go ahead.
U.S. Senate. I skipped way ahead, but there's something I want to read earlier before their time is out. That was very revealing about her early life before she married Bill Clinton. Okay, here they're talking about 2000 U.S. Senate election. She was once again the first first lady of the United States to be a candidate for elected office. She thought she was going to face Rudy Giuliani, and she ended up facing Rick Lazio, who was not a very
and me.
And that doesn't have you in here.
I know they didn't put me in there. I ran against Rudy Giuliani.
Anyway, then she won. She began her campaign by visiting every county in the state in a listening tour. I remember.
So did
that.
I. So
yeah,
did
right,
I.
Right. Listening. She devoted considerable time in traditionally Republican upstate New York regions. Vowed to improve economic situation in those areas, promising to deliver 200,000 jobs to the state over her term. This was promises. Planned to include tax credits to reward job creation and encourage business investment, especially the high-tech sector. She called for personal tax cuts for college tuition and long-term care. The contest drew national attention. Anyways, so she becomes the senator. Upon entering the Senate, she maintained a low public profile. Yeah, I remember that. It's like she disappeared. And built relationships with senators from both parties. She forged alliances. She sounds like Johnson now. He was really good at that. I wonder if she's good at it. That's the question. He was really good at getting everyone to come together, and he was unabashed about going wherever he wanted to get someone to do what he wanted them to do. He'd pull them out of their cubbyhole. She forged alliances with religiously inclined senators by becoming a regular participant in the Senate prayer breakfast. That's interesting. She served on 5 Senate committees: Budget, Armed Services, Public Works, Health and Education, Labor, Aging, and Security and Cooperation in Europe. Following the September 11 attacks, Clinton sought to obtain funding for the recovery efforts in New York City and security improvements in her state. Working with New York Senator Charles Schumer, she was instrumental in securing $21 billion in funding for the World Trade Center site's redevelopment. Okay, that's something she did. She subsequently took a leading role. But she did not
fulfill what she promised, 200,000 jobs.
Right, no, we don't hear anything about that yet. Let me read.
But she might have helped with the tech industry.
Let's read what they're saying she did. She took a lead in investigating the health issues faced by 9/11 first responders. Okay, I heard about that too. She voted for the U.S. Patriot Act, 2001.
Bad.
In 2005, when the act was up for renewal, she expressed concerns with the reauthorization of that act regarding civil liberties, before voting in favor of the U.S. Patriot Act. Okay, so she voiced a few concerns, but she voted for it. Clinton strongly supported 2001 U.S. military action in Afghanistan, saying it was a chance to combat terrorism while improving the lives of Afghan women who suffered under the Taliban government. And that, as we know now, is totally a red herring. And that, you know, the people who did the 9/11 tragedy or horror were not from Afghanistan. They were from Saudi Arabia. So they're not going to go over there and bomb, obviously. Okay, Clinton voted in favor of October 2002 Iraq War Resolution, which is another red herring, in my opinion. Authorized President George Bush to use military force against Iraq. They had old scores to settle, and they put them in terms of that these people were somehow a threat.
Involved with terrorists.
And involved with the terrorists, and they were going to go rogue and all this stuff. After the Iraq War began, she made trips to Iraq and Afghanistan to visit American troops. On a visit to Iraq in February 2005, Clinton noted that the insurgency had failed to disrupt the democratic elections held earlier and that parts of the country were functioning well. So in her opinion, things were going well. Observing that war developments were draining regular and reserve forces, she co-introduced legislation to increase the size of the United States Army by 80,000 soldiers to ease the strain. 2005 said that while immediate withdrawal from Iraq would be a mistake, Bush's pledge to stay, quote, until the job is done, unquote, was also misguided as it gave Iraqis, quote, an open-ended invitation not to take care of themselves, unquote. Her stance caused frustration among those in the Democratic Party who favored quick withdrawal. Clinton supported retaining and improving health benefits for reservists and lobbied against the closure of several military bases.
Did you hear that, Dennis?
So she straddled both sides.
Yes.
Just like she's had Republican leanings and she's had some Democratic leanings. She plays both sides. And I want to go, I want to leave this and go to what I was hoping to cover about her early, before she married Bill. And this, I think, is kind of revealing. She, upon graduation from Wellesley, she was still riding a good wave of popularity, and she was, really, going from one accomplishment to another. So she serves as a staff attorney on the newly founded Children's Defense Fund in Massachusetts, as a consultant to the Carnegie Council on Children. 1974, she was a member of the impeachment inquiry staff, advising House Committee on the Judiciary during the Watergate scandal. And we all know who that was. That was Richard Nixon, whom she supported when she was a Republican back in the day. So she's capable of, all kinds of interesting transitions. Under the guidance of Chief Counsel John Doerr and Senior Member Bernard Nussbaum, Rodham helped research procedures for impeachment and the historical grounds and standards for impeachment. So she helped to impeach. He resigned before they impeached him. And that was 1974. Rodham was viewed as someone with a bright political future at this point. Political organizer, consultant Betsy Wright had moved from Texas to Washington the previous year to help guide her career. And Wright thought Rodham had the potential to become a future senator or president. Meanwhile, Clinton had repeatedly asked Rodham to marry him, and she continued to demur. She was riding a very excellent wave of accomplishment at this point, and didn't want to get married, which is kind of understandable. After failing, but here we go, here's the transition. After failing, and this is probably her first failure ever, the District of Columbia bar exam and passing the Arkansas exam, Rodham came to a key decision, as she later wrote, quote, "I chose to follow my heart instead of my head," unquote. Now this is the second quote, the only one that they're putting in here. She thus followed Bill Clinton to Arkansas rather than staying in Washington, where career prospects were brighter. She was then teaching law and running for a seat. He was then teaching law and running for a seat at the U.S. House of Representatives in his home state. They moved to Fayetteville, Arkansas, and she became one of only 2 female faculty members in the School of Law at the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville. So another first or second, there you go. So anyways, we know she joined the Rose Law Firm. She was another first there, I guess, too, whatever. And still her interest in children and families going through these years. Bill Clinton loses his bid to become, I think, a mayor or something. He becomes he
became governor.
He eventually becomes governor, right, of Arkansas. And then, they run for president together, and she says you get 2 for the price of 1. I remember she said that. I don't see them quoting that here, right? That was when people began to suspect that she was a powerful woman, and they were concerned about, tamping her down to first lady status, and they didn't want her to be accomplishing great things as first lady because nobody was doing that. And so, you got all kinds of things going on there. She tried to establish her health care. We remember that very well. Healthcare and other policy initiatives. They didn't want her to have credit for that. So it took until Obama's administration for a form of that to finally come through. And I'm going to have a coffee.
Okay, I'm gonna cut in. Susan's got a bad cold, and she's fighting it off as best she could. Dennis, I did promise people that I will try to come up with an answer for the problems we have. Did I not do that?
Yes, right.
Well, you've heard me say this before. What do you think we need to actually get a system that works? Let me change it. Let me change the question. What controls the political systems around the world?
Money.
Economics, right?
Right.
And we've taken that for granted. So to get a political system that's working, we can't really change the political system without changing the money, the economics portion of it. Is that right?
Right. We need to reform the way that we finance campaigns. Have you ever heard of campaign finance reform?
Yes, but those are just words, Dennis, because you can't change the financing of the campaigns until you change the economics. In other words, how much money should I put in? Am I allowed to put into a campaign in dollars?
No limit.
Even if there was a limit, there'd be no way to measure that limit. In other words, in physical amounts. In other words, how much is a dollar worth?
Okay.
You can't answer that, can you?
Well, some people would say yes, you can. You go take that dollar into a store, and that dollar can only buy so much.
No, the dollar may buy something physical that you need for some reason. But if the dollar changes, it can't buy something physical that you need. Supposing we go into hyperinflation, that same dollar won't even buy a loaf of bread, right? Well, right now it won't even do that either, would it?
Okay, right.
So what I'm suggesting is we need to not look at a dollar or a currency because we can't measure it. What we need to do is change the economic system to be based on something that's physical. And the way we do that is we know that nature or God or gives us the sun, which gives us enough energy units for our food. 1,000,000 energy units for every human being in the world needs 1,000,000 energy units or calories of food to live a year. And the same holds true for water. From the sun, we get fresh water because of evaporation, and we need about 1,000,000 units of that to live. Without that, we die. And healthcare, and shelter. Depending upon where you live, you can measure the energy units in watts or whatever energy units you want, but there's a minimum amount you takes to live depending upon where you are. And then, of course, you can add into education. When you add education into that, there's no energy unit for that, but all human beings are different as far as their ability in their brain to how they want to educate themselves. And when you educate the population, you also talk about people talk about population growth a lot to me. We can educate people to make their own decision on that, their own decision on health care, their own decision on what kind of energy units for food they want, and clean water, and so on and so forth. So education is an open function. So we say that every human being in the world, and we all live about 80 years of life. So I'm saying to you that between the 80 years of life, the education, food, and shelter minimum needed, we can put an axiom or a mathematical number on that and base it on physical needs. So if we can change the system to physical needs with a simple measurement, which we now have, 1,000,000 energy units for food, 1,000,000 energy units for of water, energy units for shelter and education, within an hour of work a day for any human being, you have to redefine work. Then we can then change the economic system to a physical thing. Then you allow the free market to take effect. Now, what you could do about that, what anyone listening can do about that, is use your brain, your mind, any way you can think of getting the human renewable energy measurement into the vocabulary. Because once we know there's a measurement, just like gravity has measurements, we named it gravity when an apple fell on some guy's head about 400 years ago. We've had gravity all this time, but we finally named it. Someone got the measurement out, and they say, wow, this is gravity. And you can do velocity, and you can do impact, and all these things with gravity. We still don't understand what gravity is, but we can now measure it. So this is such an important thing.
Can I end this with some references to Hillary Rodham?
Anyway, that's what you can do.
But she's clearly been forged in the furnace of political life and come out swinging her fists and still hopeful that she can make a difference. She's constantly trying to put into the public eye children's needs, women's needs, health insurance programs for children, coverage for women for their health care or Medicare. And don't cut me off yet.
No, go ahead.
She has been, she was, heavily suppressed during First Lady experiences, and they used her health care initiative against her repeatedly to try to get her to stop, participating in any way that wasn't recognized as a First Lady way, which is usually easy for people to do. But with her, she stood up to them. She kept working behind the scenes. Most traveled First Lady in the history of First Ladies. She was always traveling, visiting countries where there was suppression of women, care of children. She's clearly has retained these desires and qualities of social justice throughout all of these years that she's worked in politics. This is very, very impressive. I think that she was, in another interesting it was suggested that she did the money from yes.
They are concerned to entertain.
With him, that he became president. It was clear that they were running together. She understood how to win awards a lot more than
listening. We gotta go.
anybody else.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you all for listening. Remember the HRAM. Bye now.
And they won the big award.
Thank you. Bye. Thank
Here's
you.
this.